In a high-security intelligence facility in Arlington, Virginia, a quiet cleaning lady was about to face the confrontation that would shatter 20 years of carefully constructed invisibility. What started as another routine morning of emptying trash and mopping floors took a shocking turn when armed mercenaries stormed the building and she came face to face with the past she thought she'd buried forever. Maria Mara Castillo wasn't your typical custodial worker. For 2 decades, she had spent her life perfecting the art of being invisible, known for her silence, precision, and the uncanny ability to notice things others missed. When she encountered Delta Force operators during the facility siege, she had no idea they were got to recognize the ghost operative who officially died in Prague 20 years earlier. Mara's instinctive response to protect the terrified analysts around her would lead to the exposure of one of the military's most classified secrets. What began as a desperate attempt to stay hidden would become the resurrection of a legend. The intelligence community would never be the same after discovering that Spectre, the most dangerous infiltration specialist they'd ever produced, had been cleaning their floors and emptying their trash for 20 years, waiting for the moment when her country would need her again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the reinforced windows of the Arlington intelligence facility as Maria Castillo pushed her cleaning cart down the sterile corridor. At 52, she had perfected the art of being invisible. Head down, movements economical, never making eye contact with the analysts and administrators who hurried past in their pressed suits and security badges. For 20 years, she had been nothing more than background noise, the quiet Latina cleaning woman who emptied their trash and polished their floors. "Morning, Mara," called out Specialist Amir Delgado, one of the few who bothered to acknowledge her existence. The young analyst was hunched over his workstation, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying streams of encrypted data. Dark circles under his eyes suggested another all-nighter wrestling with network security protocols. "Good morning, Specialist," she replied softly, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of air conditioning and server fans. Amir was different from the others, respectful, kind. He reminded her of the good people she used to serve alongside, back when she wore a different kind of uniform. Mara had arrived at the facility 20 years ago with nothing but forged documents and a desperate need to disappear. The personnel office had barely glanced at her application, a middle-aged woman seeking janitorial work. She was hired on the spot, no questions asked. It was perfect camouflage. As she methodically cleaned the gleaming floors, Mara listened to the conversations around her. Analysts discussing threat assessments, technicians debating server configurations, administrators complaining about budget allocations. She absorbed every word, every technical detail. Old habits died hard. The facility housed some of the nation's most sensitive intelligence operations, each worth millions in resources and years of careful cultivation. Mara knew their operational structures by heart, not from reading classified briefings, but from muscle memory. She had once commanded similar operations, back when her name was different, and she was one of the military's most decorated covert specialists. "Hey, Mara." Amir's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, steam rising from both. "Want some? I made way too much again." She paused, considering. Coffee with Amir had become a small ritual, one of the few human connections she allowed herself. "Thank you. That's very kind." He handed her the cup, and she noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "Everything all right, Specialist?" "Yeah, just weird stuff in the network traffic lately. Lots of encrypted packets from sources I can't identify. Probably nothing, but it's keeping me up. Sometimes I think I see patterns that aren't there, you know?" Mara nodded, though internally, every instinct she had developed over decades of covert operations was suddenly alert. Amir was good at his job, better than he realized. If he was seeing patterns, there were probably patterns to see. "Perhaps you should mention it to your supervisor," she suggested carefully. "Already did. Got told to focus on my assigned tasks and stop looking for problems that don't exist." Amir's frustration was evident. "Sometimes I think they hired me just to push buttons and look busy." Before Mara could respond, the sharp click of expensive shoes on polished floor announced the approach of director Alan Pierce. At 45, Pierce was the embodiment of bureaucratic ambition, a man who had climbed the intelligence community ladder through political maneuvering rather than operational excellence. His suit was tailored, his smile practiced, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who saw people as resources to be managed. "Castillo," he said, not bothering to acknowledge Amir, "I need to speak with you." Mara set down her coffee cup and followed Pierce a few steps away from Amir's workstation. The director's expression was stern, his voice low, but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "I've received reports that you've been lingering in restricted areas during your cleaning rounds, areas where your security clearance doesn't extend." "I was only cleaning what was assigned to me, Director. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding about the boundaries." Pierce studied her face, looking for signs of deception or defiance. Finding neither, his frown deepened. "See that there isn't another misunderstanding. This facility operates on compartmentalized security for a reason. Your job is to clean, not to observe. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir. Perfectly clear." "Good. And in the future, keep your social interactions with the staff to a minimum. We maintain professional boundaries here." As Pierce walked away, Mara caught Amir's sympathetic look. The young man had heard every word and looked genuinely embarrassed on her behalf. She offered him a small smile and returned to her cart. But as she resumed her cleaning routine, Mara's mind was already processing what she'd observed that morning. The maintenance panel in Sector C that was slightly ajar when it should have been sealed. The unfamiliar faces in the loading dock who wore contractor badges but moved with military precision. The unusual pattern of encrypted traffic that had Amir concerned. 20 years of hiding had taught her to suppress these instincts, to ignore the little details that once would have demanded investigation. But today, something felt different. The facility's usual rhythm was off by just a few beats, imperceptible to most, but glaring to someone trained to read the environment like a book. She moved through the remaining corridors with practiced efficiency, but her senses were fully engaged now, cataloging every anomaly, every deviation from normal patterns. The cleaning woman's invisibility that had once been her refuge was now becoming a strategic advantage she hoped she'd never need to use. The facility's alarm system erupted at 11:47 a.m., a piercing wail that cut through the usual hum of activity like a blade. Red emergency lights began strobing in every corridor as the automated security protocols engaged, sealing blast doors and locking down access points throughout the building. Mara was on the 3rd floor when it happened, pushing her cart toward the East Wing administrative offices. The sudden cacophony of alarms and shouted instructions created instant chaos as personnel scrambled to follow emergency procedures they'd practiced but never expected to use. "All personnel to designated safe zones." The announcement crackled over the intercom system, barely audible over the alarms. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Building is in lockdown status." Through the reinforced windows, Mara could see black vehicles surrounding the facility's perimeter, too many and too coordinated to be a standard security response. Her trained eye immediately cataloged the tactical positioning, vehicles at key escape routes, personnel moving with military precision, communications equipment that suggested a sophisticated operation. The East Wing corridor was filled with panicked analysts and administrators, most of whom had never experienced anything more dangerous than a server crash. They clustered around the sealed security doors, pressing ID badges against readers that no longer responded, voices rising in fear and confusion. "The door won't open," someone shouted. "My badge isn't working." "Stay calm," Mara said quietly, though few were listening. She moved to the nearest access panel and examined the lock mechanism. Standard electromagnetic seal designed to prevent unauthorized exit during emergencies. But she knew these systems had manual overrides, if you knew where to look. Amir appeared at her elbow, his face pale but his voice steady.
Mara, what's happening? The whole network just went dark. Someone cut our communications. Before she could answer, the sound of automatic weapons fire echoed from somewhere below them. The crowd of trapped personnel fell silent, the reality of their situation suddenly, terrifyingly clear. "We need to move," Mara said, her voice still quiet, but carrying a new authority that made several people turn toward her. "This corridor is a trap if they come up the main stairwell." "Who's they?" demanded Sarah Chen, a senior analyst whose usual composure was cracking. "And how would you know anything about—" The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made the corridor feel like the inside of a beating heart. Someone screamed. Others began praying in various languages. Mara moved to the maintenance access panel she'd noticed was ajar that morning, the detail that had nagged at her subconscious. She pressed against it, and it swung open to reveal a narrow service corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway. "Through here," she said. "It leads to the central stairwell. We can reach the secure zones from there." "How do you know about—" "Does it matter?" Emir interrupted, already moving toward the opening. "She's offering us a way out." The sound of boots on stairs, heavy, coordinated, ascending, decided the matter. One by one, the trapped personnel began squeezing through the maintenance access, Mara guiding them into the narrow service corridor that few of them had known existed. She was the last to enter, pausing to listen to the approaching footsteps. Professional, disciplined, but not American military. The rhythm was different, the boot patterns unfamiliar. Foreign operators, highly trained, moving with the confidence of a team that had rehearsed this exact scenario. In the service corridor, Mara guided the group forward using emergency lighting and her memory of building schematics she'd studied during 20 years of invisible observation. The space was cramped, filled with pipes and electrical conduits, but it was hidden and defensible. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered as they moved. "No cleaning lady knows building layouts like this." Mara didn't answer. Instead, she held up a hand for silence as voices became audible through the main corridor they'd just abandoned. The words were in Russian, spoken with the crisp efficiency of military communications. Through a ventilation grate, she could see the intruders spreading through the east wing. 6 men, wearing tactical gear and carrying assault weapons with the casual familiarity of professionals. Their leader was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of scars that came from real combat, not training accidents. As he turned toward the light, Mara felt her blood freeze. Even after 20 years, she recognized that face. The sharp cheekbones, the pale eyes that missed nothing, the subtle way he held his left shoulder slightly forward to compensate for an old injury. Dmitry Volkov, former Spetsnaz, turned mercenary, turned arms dealer, turned ghost hunter. The man whose operation she had destroyed in Prague in 2003, costing him millions and earning his eternal enmity. The man who had forced her to fake her own death to escape his vendetta. And now he was here, in her sanctuary, 20 years later. Volkov spoke into his radio, his voice carrying clearly through the ventilation system. "Building secured. Beginning phase 2. And Boris, our old friend Spectre is here. I can feel it. Start the search." In the darkness of the service corridor, surrounded by frightened analysts who depended on her for escape, Mara closed her eyes and felt the weight of 2 decades of carefully constructed invisibility beginning to crumble. The sound of helicopters approaching from the north was barely audible over the facility's continuing alarms, but Mara's trained ear caught the distinctive rotor signature of military aircraft. Multiple birds, flying in tight formation, a response team deployment pattern she recognized from a dozen similar operations. "That's Delta Force," she murmured, almost to herself. "And how can you tell?" Emir caught her words despite the noise. Before she could answer, the building's intercom crackled to life with a new voice, heavily accented, coldly professional. Attention facility personnel. I am Colonel Dmitry Volkov, and my team now controls this building. We have taken hostages in the main server room and will begin executing them in 30 minutes unless our demands are met. We require access to classified file designation Crimson Echo and safe passage from the facility. Any attempt at rescue will result in immediate casualties. The analysts in the service corridor exchanged terrified glances. Sarah Chen was openly weeping now, and two of the junior staff members looked ready to collapse from fear. He said Volkov, Emir whispered. I've seen that name in old intelligence reports. He's supposed to be dead. So was Spectre, Mara replied quietly. Apparently, we're both having a busy day. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of fast ropes hitting the roof above them. Delta Force operators beginning their assault. Within minutes, she could hear the systematic clearing operations beginning, doors being breached, corridors secured, commands shouted in the clipped, efficient language of professional soldiers.
Mara guided her group toward the central stairwell access, knowing they needed to reach the ground floor and the designated safe zones before the building became a full-scale battlefield. But as they emerged from the service corridor, they found themselves face-to-face with a team of operators in full tactical gear. Civilians, hands visible. The team leader's voice was muffled by his face mask, but his bearing screamed military command. Move to the wall, face forward. As the frightened analysts complied, the team leader's gaze settled on Mara. Even through his tactical goggles, she could see him studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. He stepped closer, his weapon lowered but ready. Ma'am, I need you to remove any face covering and look directly at me. Mara complied, meeting his gaze steadily. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the operator's posture changed subtly, his stance shifting from professional caution to something approaching shock. Jesus Christ, he breathed, his voice barely audible. Spectre? The name hung in the air between them like a physical presence. The other operators on his team exchanged glances, and one of them, a woman with captain's bars visible on her gear, stepped forward. Major Brooks, what? Captain Morgan, establish a perimeter. These civilians need escort to the safe zone. Major Ethan Brooks never took his eyes off Mara. Ma'am, I need you to speak with me privately. Mara nodded to Amir. Go with them. You'll be safe now. But what about you? I'll be fine, Specialist. Take care of the others. As Captain Morgan led the group of analysts away, Brooks removed his helmet and face mask, revealing features that Mara remembered from another time, another war. He was older now, gray at the temples, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of too many missions and too much responsibility. But the steady competence was unchanged. Ethan, she said simply. We thought you were dead. The explosion in Prague. That was the idea. She glanced around the corridor, noting the tactical positions his team had automatically assumed. How did you recognize me? You move the same way, hold yourself the same way. 20 years of desk work would never change that. He studied her face. The question is, what the hell are you doing here? Working, living quietly, staying invisible. Until about an hour ago, that plan was working perfectly. Captain Morgan returned, her expression skeptical as she took in the conversation. Major, we have a situation report. The hostiles have fortified positions in the server room and at least 3 other locations. They're dug in and waiting. How many hostages? 12 confirmed, including the facility director. Brooks nodded, then turned back to Mara. Volkov mentioned Spectre in his transmission. He knows you're here. He knows someone matching my old operational profile is here. He doesn't know I'm the cleaning lady he's probably walked past a dozen times. Yet. We could use your help, Brooks said carefully. Your knowledge of infiltration tactics, building layout, Volkov's of operational patterns? No. The word was flat, final. I'm not that person anymore, Ethan. I haven't been for 20 years. Captain Morgan stepped forward, her tone respectful but challenging. Ma'am, I don't know who you are or what your history is, but we have a dozen innocent people about to die. If you have skills that could help. You don't understand, Captain. I'm not Spectre anymore. I'm nobody. I'm invisible. That's how I've survived this long, and that's how I intend to keep surviving. Brooks was quiet for a moment, studying her face. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of shared history and mutual respect. "Phoenix," he said, using her old call sign. 12 people are going to die if we can't get to them in time. One of them is probably Amir, the kid you've been protecting for the last hour. Volkov isn't just going to take his intel and leave. You know how he operates. He's going to execute everyone in this building who might have seen his face. The words hit home, and Mara felt something she'd kept buried for 20 years beginning to stir. Not the bloodlust or the adrenaline addiction that consumed some operators, but the simple, profound need to protect innocence that had driven her to join special operations in the first place. Besides, Brooks continued, your invisibility is already blown. Volkov suspects Spectre is here. It's only a matter of time before he figures out who you really are. Through the building sound system, Volkov's voice echoed again. 20 minutes remain. I trust the American rescue team is listening. Your legendary Spectre cannot hide forever. Come out, old friend. Let us finish what we started in Prague. In the silence that followed, Mara looked at Brooks's expectant face, then at Captain Morgan's mixture of skepticism and hope. She thought about Amir's kindness, about the frightened analysts she'd guided to safety, about 20 years of self-imposed exile that was ending whether she chose it or not. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If I do this, she said finally, I do it my way. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We get the hostages out alive, and then I disappear again. Brooks nodded. Understood. Captain Morgan looked between them, still clearly confused but beginning to sense the gravity of what was happening. Sir, with respect, who exactly is she? Brooks glanced at Mara, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Captain Morgan, meet Maria Castillo. 20 years ago, she was known as Spectre, the best infiltration specialist the military ever produced. She's been dead for 2 decades, officially speaking. The Spectre? But that's just a legend. The ghost operative who could infiltrate any facility, extract any target. Not a legend, Mara said quietly. Just a middle-aged woman who used to be very good at her job. She looked directly at Morgan. And Captain, I'm about to find out if I still am. Brooks led Mara and Captain Morgan to a secure communications post that his team had established in an empty conference room. Maps of the facility were spread across the table. Tactical positions marked in red and radio chatter from other Delta Force units provided a constant backdrop of operational updates. Talk to me about Volkov. What's his endgame here? Mara studied the building schematics, her finger tracing possible infiltration routes with automatic precision. He's not here for intelligence. The Crimson Echo file he mentioned, that's a smokescreen. Dmitri never cared about selling information to the highest bidder. Then what does he want? Morgan asked.
Me. The word came out flat, matter of fact. This whole operation is designed to flush me out. The hostages are bait. The demands are theater. He's been hunting Spectre for 20 years, and he finally found me. Brooks leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. The Prague mission. What really happened there? Mara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old ghosts and carefully buried memories. Dmitri was running weapons through Eastern Europe, using diplomatic pouches and corrupt officials. Big operation. Surface-to-air missiles, armor-piercing rounds, enough firepower to destabilize 3 countries. My job was to infiltrate his network, identify the key players, and provide targeting intelligence for a joint NATO strike. Standard interdiction operation, Morgan observed. Should have been. But Dmitri was better than our intelligence suggested. He made me 2 days into the mission. Mara's finger found a ventilation shaft on the building schematic, tracing its path with unconscious expertise. I had a choice. Abort and let him escape with his weapons, or complete the mission knowing he was on to me.
You stayed, Brooks said. It wasn't a question. I stayed, planted the tracking devices, identified his financial networks, confirmed the weapons cache locations. But when the strike team moved in, Dmitri was ready. He'd rigged the entire facility with explosives. The memory played out behind her eyes. The sudden realization that she'd been played, the desperate sprint through collapsing corridors, and the explosion that should have killed her, but instead provided the perfect cover for her staged death. 17 people died in that building. Dmitri's men, NATO operatives, even some innocent civilians who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The mission was a success. We disrupted his weapons network and froze his assets. But the cost. That's why you disappeared, Morgan said, understanding dawning in her voice. The command decided Spectre had become too much of a liability. Too many enemies, too much attention from hostile intelligence services. They staged my death and gave me a new identity. Clean slate, quiet life, no more missions. Mara looked up from the schematics. It was supposed to be permanent. Brooks's radio crackled with an update from the perimeter team. Major, we've identified additional hostile positions on floors 2 and 4. They're dug in and waiting. Acknowledged. He turned back to Mara. Phoenix, I need you to understand something. The kid, Amir, he's not in the main hostage group. Our surveillance shows Dmitri separated him from the others. He's being held in a secondary location. The information hit Mara like a physical blow. Amir, who had shown her nothing but kindness for years, who had shared his coffee and treated her like a human being when everyone else saw her only as the furniture. He was alone with Volkov's mercenaries. Where? She asked, her voice deadly quiet. Server room B, sub-level 2. It's isolated, heavily defended, and I know where it is. Mara was already moving, her earlier reluctance evaporating like morning mist. Wait, Brooks caught her arm. You can't just... Can't what? Can't save the one person in this building who ever treated me like I mattered? She pulled free, her eyes blazing with an intensity that Captain Morgan had never seen in a civilian. That boy risked his career to warn me about network anomalies. He shared his coffee and asked about my day when everyone else looked through me like I was invisible. I will not let him die because I'm too much of a coward to be who I used to be. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened. Her movements became more economical and precise, and when she spoke again, it was with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. Besides, Dmitri just made this personal. The moment he separated Amir from the other hostages, he declared war on Maria Castillo, not just Spectre. And Maria Castillo doesn't run from fights. Brooks and Morgan exchanged glances. They had both witnessed the moment when a legend stepped out of retirement, and neither would forget it. What do you need? Brooks asked. The maintenance shafts beneath the facility were a maze of pipes, electrical conduits, and ventilation ducts that most personnel never knew existed. Mara moved through them with the fluid grace of someone who had spent 20 years memorizing every inch of the building's hidden architecture. Behind her, Captain Morgan struggled to keep pace in the cramped space, her tactical gear catching on pipes and junction boxes. How do you know this route won't be monitored? She whispered. Because 20 years ago, when I first started working here, I disabled the sensors in these sections one by one, told maintenance it was a cleaning supply issue, chemical vapors interfering with the electronics. Mara paused at a junction, listening to the sounds filtering through the walls. Old habits. They were approaching server room B from below, using a route that would bring them up through the floor rather than the heavily defended doorways. Mara had identified 3 separate teams of Volkov's mercenaries between their current position and the hostages, and she intended to neutralize them systematically. Contact. 2 o'clock, she murmured, pointing to a ventilation grate that provided a view into a storage room. 2 armed men were positioned there, watching the main corridor approach to the server room. Morgan started to reach for her weapon, but Mara caught her wrist. Noise discipline. We take them quietly or not at all. Ma'am, with respect, you're not armed, and Mara's smile was predatory. Captain, I've been armed every day for 20 years. You just never noticed.
From her cleaning cart, which she had retrieved during their movement through the maintenance areas, she produced what appeared to be ordinary supplies: a spray bottle filled with industrial cleaner, a screwdriver from her toolkit, and several zip ties used for securing trash bags. But in her hands, they became something else entirely. The first mercenary never saw her coming. Mara emerged from the floor access panel behind him with liquid silence, the screwdriver finding the precise nerve cluster at the base of his neck that would render him unconscious without permanent damage. He dropped like a stone. His partner spun toward the sound, but Mara was already moving. The spray bottle contained a mixture of ammonia and isopropyl alcohol that temporarily blinded and disoriented. While he stumbled, she closed the distance and applied a chokehold with the efficiency of someone who had done it hundreds of times. 90 seconds after the engagement began, both mercenaries were unconscious and zip-tied in the storage room, hidden from casual observation. "Jesus, you really are her, aren't you?" "I'm a middle-aged cleaning lady who knows where to hit people." The mystique was always overrated.
They moved to the next position, where 3 more mercenaries had established an overwatch point covering the server room approaches. This time, Mara's approach was more complex, using her knowledge of the building's environmental systems to create a distraction. She accessed a maintenance panel and rerouted power to the air conditioning system, causing a loud, attention-grabbing mechanical failure in the adjacent corridor. When 2 of the mercenaries moved to investigate, she and Morgan took them down in coordinated silence. The third man was more alert, his weapon already raised when they entered his position. But Mara had anticipated this, using a mirror she'd removed from a bathroom to observe his exact location and state of readiness. "Behind the filing cabinet, AK-74, finger on trigger," she whispered to Morgan. "Ricochet shot off the ceiling fixture, then close and control." Morgan's shot was perfectly placed, the bullet striking the overhead light and sending fragments and sparks cascading down on the mercenary. In his moment of disorientation, Mara was on him, her movements economical and devastating. "Clear," she announced, checking the unconscious man's pulse. "Server room B is directly below us now." As they prepared to descend to the sublevel, Morgan caught Mara's arm. "Before we go down there, I need to know, are you planning to disappear again after this?" Mara considered the question, listening to the muffled sounds of activity from the server room below. Somewhere down there, Amir was depending on her courage, and Volkov was waiting with 20 years of patience and malice. "Ask me again when this is over, Captain. Right now, I'm just trying to remember how to be someone I used to know very well." The server room's public address system crackled to life just as Mara and Morgan reached the access point above their target. Volkov's voice filled the building with its cold, precise articulation, and every word was clearly intended for one specific audience. "My dear Spectre," he began, the endearment dripping with 20 years of accumulated hatred. "I know you can hear me. I know you are somewhere in this building, probably planning some elaborate rescue attempt. How wonderfully predictable." Morgan shot Mara a questioning look, but she held up a hand for silence, listening intently to the tone and cadence of Volkov's words. He was buying them with psychological warfare, she realized, keeping their attention while his remaining teams repositioned. "You cost me $17 million in Prague, and 3 of my best men. But more than that, you cost me my reputation. Do you know how difficult it is to rebuild trust in the arms trade after a single operative destroys your entire network?" Through the ventilation grate, Mara could see into the server room. Amir was there, bound to a chair, but apparently unharmed, his eyes darting around the room as he tried to process what he was hearing. 3 armed mercenaries flanked him, their weapons trained on the various access points. But it was the 4th figure that made Mara's blood run cold. Volkov himself stood behind Amir, one hand resting almost gently on the young analyst's shoulder. Even 20 years later, he moved with the controlled grace of a predator, his pale eyes scanning the room with mechanical precision. "I have spent 20 years tracking you, my invisible friend, following rumors, investigating anomalies, searching for the ghost who destroyed my livelihood. And do you know what I discovered? You never left the game, not really. You simply changed uniforms." Volkov's hand tightened on Amir's shoulder, causing the young man to wince. "This facility has been under my surveillance for months. I have watched you clean these floors, empty these waste baskets, polish these servers. I have studied your routines, your habits, your pathetic attempt at domestic normalcy." The revelation hit Mara like a physical blow. All these years, thinking she was invisible, thinking she was safe, and Volkov had been watching, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to spring his trap. "But I confess I was uncertain. Could the legendary specter really be reduced to such mundane work? So I arranged this little test, a crisis that would force you to reveal yourself, to remember who you really are beneath that carefully constructed facade of mediocrity." Through the building's communication system, Director Pierce's voice suddenly interrupted, sharp with bureaucratic panic. "This is Director Pierce. All Delta Force personnel are ordered to detain the individual known as Maria Castillo immediately. She is an unauthorized presence with undisclosed security classifications. I repeat, Director Pierce." Volkov's voice overrode the transmission. "Still protecting your precious protocols, I see. Tell me, how does it feel to discover that your humble cleaning woman is one of the most dangerous operatives your government ever produced?" In the server room below, Amir's face showed dawning comprehension and something that might have been awe. The kid was smart. He was putting together 20 years of small observations and quiet competence, seeing them in an entirely new light. "You see, Spectre, your bureaucratic friend is quite right to be concerned. Your presence here compromises numerous ongoing operations. The mere fact that you exist undermines the official story of your death. How inconvenient for everyone involved." Morgan's radio crackled with new orders from command. "Captain Morgan, you are directed to secure the individual in your custody and return her to the command post immediately." Mara looked at Morgan steadily. "Your choice, Captain. Follow orders or help me save that boy's life." Before Morgan could respond, Volkov's voice filled the air again, but this time with a different tone. The satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "I can see you there, old friend, in the ventilation system above the server room, just as I predicted. Still using the same infiltration routes, still trusting in the same tired tactics. 20 years of hiding have made you predictable." The server room erupted in automatic weapons fire as Volkov's mercenaries opened up on the ceiling. Mara and Morgan rolled away from the access point as bullets punched through metal and concrete, filling the air with deadly fragments. "The building is surrounded, Spectre. My teams control all the exits. Your Delta Force friends are pinned down on the upper floors. And I have something you care about." Through the gunfire, Volkov's voice remained calm, conversational. "So here is my proposal. Surrender yourself and the boy lives. Continue this charade, and I will execute him while you watch." In the sudden silence that followed the ceasefire, Mara made her decision. She looked at Morgan, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Captain, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Morgan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "What do you need?"
I need you to follow my lead, no matter how crazy it seems. And I need you to remember that sometimes the best way to save a life is to risk everything." Through the damaged ceiling, Volkov's laughter echoed up to them. "Come down, Spectre. Let us finish this properly, face to face, as it should have been finished 20 years ago."
Mara descended through the damaged ceiling access point, with her hands visible and empty, moving with deliberate slowness to avoid triggering a nervous response from Volkov's men. Captain Morgan remained hidden above, positioned to provide overwatch and support, according to the plan they had hastily devised. The server room was exactly as she remembered it from countless nights of cleaning, rows of humming machines processing the facility's data streams, the air thick with the ozone smell of electronics and the constant whisper of cooling fans. But now it felt like a tomb, illuminated by emergency lighting that cast harsh shadows across everything. Volkov stood behind Amir's chair, his weapon held casually but ready. At 63, he was still formidable, gray-haired but straight-backed, with the coiled tension of a man who had survived decades in the world's most dangerous profession. His pale eyes tracked Mara's every movement with the intensity of a predator finally cornering long-sought prey. "Maria Castillo," he said, savoring each syllable. Or should I say, Phoenix Williams? Such a pedestrian name for such an extraordinary woman. "Dmitri," she kept her voice level, professional, "you're looking well for a dead man. As are you, my dear. 20 years of pretending to be ordinary suits you. Very domestic." His smile held no warmth. "I have often wondered what happened to the woman that cost me everything. Did you think of me during those quiet years of emptying trash and mopping floors? Did you ever consider the lives you destroyed with your idealistic crusade?" Amir's eyes were wide with fear and confusion, but he was listening intently to every word. The kid was smart enough to know that information might be his only weapon in this situation. "I thought about the 17 people who died in Prague. I thought about them every day." "How touching. And yet you continued to serve the same masters who sent you on that suicide mission. Tell me, did they even attend your funeral? Did anyone mourn the passing of their most effective killer?" The words were chosen to wound, but Mara had had 20 years to make peace with her choices. "I served something larger than myself, Dmitri. You served your bank account. That's the difference between us." Volkov's expression darkened. "The difference between us, my dear Spectre, is that I was honest about what I was. You wrapped yourself in patriotic rhetoric while leaving corpses across 3 continents." He gestured for her to move closer, and she complied, her eyes cataloging the positions of his 3 mercenaries, the locations of cover, and the various improvised weapons within reach. Old habits, automatic as breathing. "I have a confession to make," Volkov continued. "This operation is not entirely about revenge. You see, there are several governments who would pay handsomely for proof that the legendary Spectre is still alive. Your death was a carefully constructed fiction, and fiction can be unraveled." "Meaning?" "Meaning that your quiet retirement depends on my discretion. Surrender yourself to me, and I will ensure your secret dies with me. Resist, and I will auction your location to the highest bidder. Imagine 20 years of accumulated enemies, all given your exact address." The threat was real, and they both knew it. But Mara had not survived 2 decades in hiding by yielding to intimidation, and she wasn't about to start now. "Or," she said quietly, "I could kill you right here and end this once and for all." Volkov laughed, the sound echoing off the server room walls. "With what? Your bare hands? Against 4 armed professionals?" He shook his head. "You have grown soft in your retirement, Spectre. The woman I knew in Prague would never have walked into such an obvious trap." "The woman you knew in Prague was trying to avoid civilian casualties. I don't have that luxury anymore."
In the maintenance shaft above, Captain Morgan heard the subtle shift in Mara's tone and prepared to move. The signal they had agreed upon was simple. When Mara mentioned civilians, it meant she was about to act. But before anyone could move, the building's power grid fluctuated, causing the server room lights to flicker and several of the machines to emit warning beeps. In that moment of distraction, Mara saw her opportunity. The nearest mercenary was standing beside a rack of servers, his weapon held at ready position, but not actively aimed. Mara dove toward him, using a rolling motion that brought her behind the server rack and out of the line of fire from the other shooters. The mercenary tried to track her movement, but she was already inside his weapons radius, her elbow striking his solar plexus with surgical precision. As he doubled over, she acquired his weapon and rolled again, putting the server rack between herself and Volkov's position. "Impressive," Volkov called out, seemingly unperturbed by the sudden violence. "But ultimately pointless. You are still outnumbered than outgunned." From her position behind the servers, Mara could see Amir's chair through the gaps in the equipment rack. The kid was terrified, but trying to stay calm, his analyst's mind probably working on escape scenarios, even as his body remained frozen with fear. "Tell me something, Dmitri," she called out. "How did you find me? 20 years is a long time to hold a grudge." "Patience, my dear, and technology. Your government was quite thorough in erasing Spectre's existence, but they could not erase her methods. I simply had to wait for those methods to surface again." Above them, Captain Morgan was moving into position, using the damaged ceiling access point to get a clear shot at Volkov's position. But the angle was difficult, and Amir was too close to risk a clean engagement. "The network anomalies your young friend detected, those were my doing. I have been probing this facility's defenses for months, watching for any response that showed more than ordinary competence. And you, my invisible friend, responded exactly as I expected." The revelation hit Mara with sickening clarity. Every instinct that told her something was wrong, every subtle abnormality she had noticed, it had all been orchestrated to draw her out. "So you see," Volkov continued, "this confrontation was inevitable from the moment you chose to care about something again. The moment you allowed yourself to feel responsible for these people, you became predictable, and predictable operatives are dead operatives." Through the server room's intercom, Director Pierce's voice crackled with bureaucratic panic. "All units, we have movement in the underground levels, unknown personnel in the restricted areas." Volkov raised his weapon toward Amir's head. "Enough games, Spectre. Surrender now or the boy dies. You have 10 seconds to decide." In the sudden silence that followed, Mara closed her eyes and let herself remember who she used to be. Not the legend, not the ghost story that had grown around her name, but the young woman who had joined special operations because she believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves.
When she opened her eyes again, Spectre had returned. "Dmitri," she said, her voice carrying across the server room with deadly calm, "you made one crucial mistake." "And what is that?" "You assumed I came here to negotiate." The lights went out. The server room plunged into absolute darkness as Mara triggered the emergency power cutoff she had located during 20 years of after-hours cleaning. The constant hum of cooling fans died, leaving only the sound of breathing and the subtle shift of fabric as trained operators adjusted to the sudden change in tactical conditions. In the blackness, Mara moved with the fluid precision of someone who had memorized every pipe, every cable run, every obstacle in the room. She had cleaned this space countless times, knew the exact distance between server racks, could navigate by touch and muscle memory while her opponents fumbled in unfamiliar terrain. "Clever," Volkov's voice came from near Amir's position, calm despite the tactical disadvantage. "But darkness works both ways, my dear Spectre, and I have had 20 years to study your methods." The first mercenary died silently. Mara's improvised garrote, fashioned from cable ties and wire, cutting off his air supply before he could cry out. She left him unconscious and zip-tied behind a server rack, his weapon now in her hands.
You always preferred close-quarters combat, Volkov continued, his voice slightly muffled now as he moved behind cover. Prague taught me that much about you. You could have killed me from a distance that night, but you chose to plant the charges personally. Why? Professional pride? Or did you want to look me in the eye? Mara said nothing, using his voice to triangulate his position while moving through the maze of equipment. The AK-74 she had acquired was a familiar weight in her hands. She had trained on similar weapons decades ago, and the muscle memory was intact despite 20 years of disuse. A muzzle flash lit the room for a split second as one of the remaining mercenaries fired blindly in her direction. The bullets sparked off server housings, filling the air with the acrid smell of damaged electronics. But the flash had revealed his position, and Mara's return fire was precise and economical. 2 down, she announced quietly, more for Captain Morgan's benefit than Volkov's. Above them, she could hear Morgan moving into a better position, using the darkness to her own advantage. Impressive reflexes for someone who has spent 20 years cleaning floors. But tell me, how many innocent people will die because of your stubbornness? This facility houses classified materials worth millions. If the servers overheat without cooling, how much sensitive intelligence will be lost? The psychological warfare was calculated to make her hesitate, to consider collateral damage over immediate tactical advantage. But Mara had learned long ago that hesitation killed more operatives than enemy fire. She moved toward Amir's last known position, using sound and air movement to navigate. The boy was still breathing. She could hear the slight whistle of air through his nose, steady despite his fear. He was tougher than he looked. "You know what I learned about you in Prague?" she called out, drawing Volkov's attention while she repositioned. "You talk too much when you're nervous." His answering laugh was genuine, appreciative. "And you become deadly when you care about someone. The Maria Castillo who cleaned these floors for 20 years would never have walked into this trap. But the moment you decided that boy mattered to you, you became Spectre again." The observation was accurate and uncomfortable. Mara had spent 2 decades avoiding emotional attachments, precisely because they created tactical vulnerabilities. But Amir's quiet friendship had slipped past her defenses, making her human again, in ways that were both precious and dangerous. "The question is," Volkov continued, "was it worth it? Coming back to life only to die in the same place you've been hiding?" Mara found Amir's chair by touch, running her fingers along the zip ties that bound him. The boy tensed at the contact, then relaxed as she squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. Working by feel, she began cutting his restraints with a utility knife from her cleaning supplies. "Almost free," she whispered directly into his ear. "When I say move, get behind the server rack to your left and stay down." Above them, Captain Morgan's voice crackled through the tactical radio. "Spectre, I have movement near the northeast corner. Advise your position." "Southwest quadrant, liberating the asset. Take the shot when you have it." "Negative. Too much interference. You're on your own down there." The last zip tie parted, and Amir's hands came free. Mara pressed the utility knife into his palm. "Stay behind me. If something happens, get to the emergency exit and don't look back." She moved away from his position, drawing any potential fire away from the freed hostage. In the darkness, she could sense Volkov moving, the subtle displacement of air, the barely audible scrape of fabric against metal. He was close now, perhaps 10 feet away, waiting for her to reveal herself. "I have a confession," his voice came from directly ahead of her. "This operation was never about revenge. Oh, the satisfaction would have been considerable, but I am, as you noted, a businessman first." Mara froze, finger on the trigger of her acquired weapon. Something in his tone had changed, less theatrical, more genuine, more dangerous. "You see, there are parties interested in your continued existence. Not to kill you, that would be wasteful, but to employ you. Your skills, properly motivated, could be quite valuable in the current geopolitical climate." "Meaning?" "Meaning this entire operation was a job interview, my dear Spectre. A test to see if 20 years of domestic tranquility had dulled your edge. His laugh was soft, almost fond. "I am pleased to report that you have passed with exceptional marks." The revelation hit her like cold water. Not revenge, not a vendetta, but recruitment. She had been manipulated not just by Volkov's hatred, but by his business acumen. The hostages were never in any real danger. "My men are professionals, not murderers, though I confess the boy was not part of the original plan. His involvement was an unexpected complication." She processed this information while maintaining her tactical awareness. Volkov was still a threat, perhaps more so now that she understood his true motivation. A man seeking revenge might be predictable, but a man conducting business was capable of anything. "And if I refuse your generous offer, then you disappear again, as you have for 20 years. But this time you will have the knowledge that your government used you to test their security protocols, just as I used you to demonstrate your continued effectiveness. We are all pawns in someone else's game, Spectre. The only choice is which player you serve."
The lights flickered back on as the facility's backup power systems engaged, flooding the server room with harsh fluorescent illumination. Mara found herself face to face with Volkov across a gap of perhaps 8 feet, both of them with weapons raised and ready. He looked older in the light, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his hands were steady, and his pale gaze held the same calculating intelligence she remembered from Prague. 20 years, he said quietly. "We have both changed. Some things never change, Dmitri." They fired simultaneously. Mara's shot took him center mass, a clean hit that spun him around and sent him crashing into a server rack. But his shot had found its mark as well, a burning line across her left shoulder that sent her stumbling backward against the wall. Blood spread across her cleaning uniform as she kept her weapon trained on Volkov's prone form. He was breathing, but unconscious, his weapon several feet away from his outstretched hand. "Amir," she called out, "are you hurt?" The young analyst emerged from behind the server rack, shaken but unharmed. "I'm okay. You're bleeding. It's superficial." She hoped that was true. The shoulder was numb but mobile, suggesting the bullet had missed bone and major vessels. "Help me secure him." They zip-tied Volkov's hands and feet with practiced efficiency, Mara's training taking over despite her injury. As they worked, the server room filled with the sound of approaching boots, Delta Force operators finally reaching their position. Major Brooks was the first through the door, his weapon raised and ready. He took in the scene, the unconscious mercenaries, the secured Volkov, Mara bleeding but standing, and lowered his rifle. "Jesus, Phoenix, when you decide to come out of retirement, you don't do it halfway." Captain Morgan appeared at his shoulder, her tactical gear dusty from crawling through ceiling spaces. She looked at Mara with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, that was incredible." "That was necessary," Mara corrected, though she managed a small smile. "The boy did well too, stayed calm under pressure." Amir flushed at the praise, then looked directly at her. "Mara, or should I say Spectre, why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because Maria Castillo was who I wanted to be. Spectre was who I had to be. For 20 years, I tried to forget the difference." As the medical team arrived to treat her wound, Mara looked down at Volkov's unconscious form. The man who had haunted her nightmares, who had forced her into hiding, who had just tried to recruit her back into the world she had abandoned. "Ethan," she said to Brooks, "we need to talk." The secure conference room on the facility's top floor buzzed with tense energy as various officials filed in for the post-incident debrief. Director Pierce sat at the head of the table, his expression a mixture of bureaucratic panic and barely controlled anger. Beside him sat a woman in a crisp navy uniform whom Mara didn't recognize, and a man in an expensive suit who had Justice Department written all over him. Mara entered wearing a sling on her left arm, the gunshot wound dressed and treated but still tender. The medical team had confirmed her assessment: superficial tissue damage, no permanent injury. She had been lucky.
Major Brooks and Captain Morgan flanked her as she took a seat across from Pierce, their presence a silent statement of military solidarity. The director's eyes narrowed as he noted the seating arrangement. "Ms. Castillo," Pierce began, investing her civilian name with particular emphasis. "Or perhaps I should use your real name, Phoenix Williams, presumed dead since 2003. "Maria Castillo is my real name," she replied calmly. "It has been for 20 years. "Legal semantics aside," the Justice Department representative interrupted, "your presence here has created significant complications. Your official death was classified at the highest levels, involving multiple intelligence agencies and foreign governments. Your reemergence could destabilize ongoing operations." The Navy officer leaned forward. "Admiral Sarah Chen, Naval Intelligence. Ms. Castillo, we've reviewed the mission reports from your encounter with Volkov. Your tactical performance was impressive, but it raises questions about why someone with your capabilities has been working as custodial staff in a secure facility." "Because I was retired," Mara said simply. "I had no desire to return to operational status." "Had," Pierce seized on the past tense. "Are you saying that's changed?" Before Mara could answer, Brooks spoke up. "With respect, Director Pierce, Ms. Castillo just saved this facility and everyone in it. Volkov's operation was sophisticated, well-planned, and specifically designed to exploit our security vulnerabilities. Without her intervention, we'd be looking at a dozen casualties and a major intelligence breach." "Which brings us to another concern," the Justice Department representative continued. "Mr. Volkov's initial interrogation has revealed some disturbing information. This operation wasn't random. It was part of a larger network testing security protocols at multiple sensitive facilities." Admiral Chen opened a classified folder. "We've identified similar probes at installations in Norfolk, San Diego, and Colorado Springs, all subtle, all designed to assess response capabilities without triggering major incidents. Someone is mapping our defensive posture, testing for weaknesses," Brooks observed. "Exactly. And they've been doing it for over a year." Chen looked directly at Mara. "Ms. Castillo, Volkov indicated that you were the primary target of this operation. He suggested you might have insights into who's orchestrating these tests." Mara was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. A coordinated intelligence operation targeting multiple military installations suggested state-level involvement, possibly Russian or Chinese intelligence services testing American readiness. Dmitry always worked for the highest bidder. If he's running coordinated ops against military targets, someone with deep pockets is paying for intelligence about our security capabilities. "Which brings us to our dilemma," Pierce interjected. "Your continued presence here is a security risk. Too many people know who you really are now. The operational secrecy that protected you for 20 years is gone. You're suggesting I disappear again. I'm suggesting you accept reassignment to a non-sensitive position where your identity won't be a liability." The room fell silent. Mara understood the subtext. Pierce wanted her buried in some administrative role where she couldn't embarrass anyone or complicate existing operations. Safe, invisible, and useless. Admiral Chen cleared her throat. "There is another option." All eyes turned to her. She glanced at the Justice Department representative, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "The intelligence community has been discussing the need for a specialized advisory position, someone with extensive operational experience who could assess security vulnerabilities and train response teams. Given your unique background and demonstrated capabilities—" "You're offering me a job," Mara said. "We're offering you a chance to serve again," Brooks corrected. "Officially this time. Full reinstatement, advisory role with special operations units, liaison position with multiple agencies." Pierce's face had gone red. "This is exactly the kind of irregular decision-making that led to security breaches in the first place. We have protocols, proper channel."
Director Pierce, Admiral Chen's voice cut through his objection like a blade. Miss Castillo's actions prevented a major intelligence disaster. Her methods may have been unconventional, but her results speak for themselves. Captain Morgan leaned forward. Ma'am, if I may, I've served with special operations units for 6 years, and I've never seen tactical skill like what you demonstrated today. We could learn from you. Mara looked around the table, seeing the expectant faces, feeling the weight of decision. For 20 years, she had convinced herself that Maria Castillo was who she wanted to be. Quiet, invisible, safe. But the events of the past day had proven that Spectre was who she actually was, underneath the carefully constructed facade. What exactly would this position involve? She asked. Training, assessment, operational planning. You'd work with units like Major Brooks's team, helping them prepare for threats like Volkov's network. You'd have access to intelligence reports, strategic assessments, the resources you'd need to be effective. And my cover identity would be maintained for operational security. Maria Castillo would officially transfer to a new position with appropriate clearances and authorities. Spectre would remain classified but available when needed. Mara thought about Amir, who had looked at her with such admiration after learning her true identity. She thought about Captain Morgan's eagerness to learn from her experience. She thought about all the young operators who might benefit from the hard-won knowledge she had accumulated over decades of service. Most of all, she thought about the satisfaction she had felt during the confrontation with Volkov. Not the violence, but the sense of purpose, the feeling of being fully herself for the first time in 20 years. I need one condition, she said finally. Which is? Specialist Amir Delgado gets a commendation for his role in today's operation. He showed courage under pressure and provided valuable intelligence support. That matters. Admiral Chen smiled. Agreed. Pierce started to object, but the justice representative placed a restraining hand on his arm. Director, this decision comes from levels well above your authority. Miss Castillo's reinstatement has already been approved. Mara looked at Brooks, then at Morgan, then back to Admiral Chen. When do I start? 6 weeks later, Mara stood at the edge of a Delta Force training compound in North Carolina, watching a group of young operators run close-quarters combat drills. The morning sun was warm on her face, and her left shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar as a reminder of her confrontation with Volkov. She wore civilian clothes, khakis and a simple polo shirt, but her military bearing was unmistakable. The operators treated her with the respect due to someone whose reputation had preceded her, though most of them were still learning exactly who she was. They look eager, Major Brooks observed, joining her at the observation point. They look young, she replied. When did we get so old, Ethan? Speak for yourself. I'm in my prime. He handed her a cup of coffee, black, the way she preferred it. How are you settling into the new role? It's different. Good different, but different. She took a sip of the coffee, watching as Captain Morgan demonstrated a tactical movement to the younger operators. I forgot how much I enjoyed teaching. You never taught before. No, but I learned from good teachers. Turns out there's not much difference between learning and teaching. Both require you to understand why something works, not just how. Brooks nodded toward the training area. Captain Morgan's been asking about advanced infiltration techniques. Apparently, someone told her stories about ghost operators who could appear and disappear at will. Someone has been telling tall tales. Have they? His smile was knowing. Yesterday, I watched you get into the secure building using nothing but a maintenance uniform and a confident attitude. The guards didn't even ask for identification. That's not infiltration. That's just understanding that people see what they expect to see. I suppose that's most of what infiltration really is, becoming what the environment expects instead of who you actually are. Captain Morgan approached them, slightly out of breath from the training exercise. Over the past 6 weeks, she had become Mara's unofficial protégé,
eager to learn from someone whose methods had become legend among special operations communities.
Mara raised an eyebrow. The Prague variation? That's what they're calling your technique for close-quarters disarmament in confined spaces. Word has gotten around about what you did in the server room. It's not a technique, Captain. It's just knowing your environment and using it to your advantage. She looked at the eager faces of the operators. But I suppose we can work on spatial awareness and improvised weapons. As they walked toward the training area, Brooks caught her arm gently. Phoenix, Maria, are you happy with this decision, coming back to active duty? She considered the question seriously. I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. I can't be. Too much has changed. Too much time has passed. But I'm also not the same person who was cleaning floors and pretending to be invisible. So who are you now? I'm figuring that out. She smiled, and for the first time in decades, it reached her eyes completely. But I think I'm someone who can help these young operators stay alive while they do impossible things, and maybe that's enough. An hour later, Mara found herself in the middle of the training mat, surrounded by a dozen special operations soldiers who were hanging on her every word. She was demonstrating how to use environmental factors, furniture, fixtures, even cleaning supplies, as tactical advantages in confined spaces. The key is preparation, she explained, moving through the mock-up room they had constructed. You study the space during normal operations, when no one is paying attention. You identify every potential weapon, every possible escape route, every advantage you can create for yourself. One of the younger operators raised his hand. Ma'am, how do you stay in character for so long? 20 years is a long time to maintain cover. The question was earnest, professional, but it touched on something deeper than tactical training. Mara paused, looking at the faces around her, all of them people who had chosen to serve something larger than themselves, all of them willing to sacrifice their own safety for others. You don't maintain cover, she said finally. You become the cover, until it's not cover anymore. It's just who you are. The challenge isn't pretending to be someone else. The challenge is remembering who you were before you had to pretend. The room was quiet, absorbing the implications of her words. But here's what I learned, she continued. Sometimes the person you become while you're pretending is actually who you were meant to be all along. And sometimes coming back to who you used to be means accepting who you've become. After the training session ended, Mara sat alone in the facility's cafeteria, reviewing reports from other intelligence agencies about similar security probes. Volkov had been accurate about one thing. His operation was part of a larger pattern, and understanding that pattern was crucial to preventing future incidents. Amir approached her table, carrying his own lunch tray. 6 weeks ago, he had been a shy analyst who treated her like a friend. Now he knew exactly who she was, and the dynamic between them had shifted subtly, more respectful, more professional, but somehow warmer. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Please." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said in the server room, about caring making you vulnerable. It does, but vulnerability isn't always weakness." "How do you mean?" Mara set down her fork, choosing her words carefully. "For 20 years, I tried to care about nothing except staying safe and invisible. It worked. I survived, I stayed hidden, I built a quiet life, but I wasn't really living. And now? Now I care about whether these young operators make it home to their families. I care about whether the next Volkov succeeds or fails. I care about you, and Captain Morgan, and Major Brooks, and a dozen other people who depend on me to do my job well." She smiled. "It makes me vulnerable, but it also makes me human. And human is what I want to be." As the afternoon sun slanted through the cafeteria windows, Mara looked around at the bustling activity of the training facility. Young soldiers preparing for missions they might not survive, intelligence analysts working to prevent threats they would never get credit for stopping, support staff keeping everything running smoothly while remaining largely invisible. It reminded her of the Arlington facility, but with a crucial difference. Here, she wasn't hiding. Here, she was exactly who she was supposed to be. Someone with hard-won knowledge and skills, someone who could help others succeed in impossible situations, someone who had found her way back to herself after 20 years of careful exile. Maria Castillo had been a good life, a safe life, a necessary life. But Spectre, evolved, tempered by time and loss and the hard wisdom of survival, Spectre was who she had always been meant to become. She finished her lunch, gathered her reports, and walked back toward the training areas, where Captain Morgan was waiting for her. Behind her, invisible but no longer hidden, the legend of Spectre began its second chapter. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there.